Hello, welcome back, or welcome to Making Better Bites. To my new listeners, I am so happy to be here with my guest, Katie, today. We had, as I had said before, tried to record this already for this past week's episode, which ended up being a solo episode, and I'm glad that we can finally get back to recording it today. I'm glad she was able to reschedule. So thank you, Katie, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So Katie is a PCOS dietitian. I talk a lot about hormones, but I don't personally have a lot of experience with PCOS and understanding the disease. So I thought it would be great to have her on so that she could kind of explain that to the listeners and kind of talk about the nutrition side of PCOS specifically. So Katie, if you want to go ahead and explain to us, how did you decide then to become a dietitian first off?
Yeah, so I've been a dietitian for, I don't know, almost 7 years now, or 6.5. And I started off actually in exercise science, and I have a degree in that as well. But I took a sports nutrition class during that time, and I fell in love with nutrition. I was on track to be a physical therapist, totally scrapped that and went straight towards being a dietitian after I finished my exercise science degree, and never looked back. And I really think it's just because I love food so much. I know we kind of talked a little bit about that before together as well, but it's kind of like a dietitian thing. We all kind of love food. And so I really was interested in that aspect, but I also have had experience in my early years of life, like when I was a kid, with conditions in my family, with my family members that involve nutrition. And I think I was just like, I want to learn more about this. So that's kind of how I got into nutrition and dietetics in the first place. So as far as PCOS nutrition, though, I have PCOS myself. So it was just kind of like a natural thing for me to kind of fall into this space. I've worked with a lot of people in my previous job in like a clinical setting, outpatient setting, where I was doing one-on-one counseling, and I was interacting with all different kinds of people with all different kinds of conditions. And PCOS came up quite often. And I was like, you know what? I have PCOS. They have PCOS. I should probably learn more about specifically nutrition for this condition and how I might be able to help them, truly help them, because there just wasn't a lot of information. If there was any, it was kind of hidden, and not a lot of people in the medical field really knew about it, or to actually put it into practice. And so I just started learning and learning and learning. I'd started a private practice, sort of, wasn't super serious about it, still had a full-time job. And then I'm like, you know what, I'm going to just jump into this, and I have loved it ever since.
That's really cool. How long have you had then a private practice? When did you start that with the PCOS?
Have had a private practice for, I want to say a little over 3 years. But just in the last 2 years, specifically with PCOS.
Okay.
Yeah. So it hasn't even been the whole time. I did a lot of employee wellness in my previous job, my full-time job, that I don't do that anymore. I'm full-time private practice, and I stay home with my kids as well. But now it's just PCOS. So
yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I had kind of a similar journey of loving food and starting in the food science world of wanting to do research and development, like I had told you before.
yeah.
And took one nutrition course in life cycle and kind of just ended up in dietetics in that route. So I think it is if you love food, you just somehow find your way to nutrition, which is
Yeah.
a lot of fun. And there's not a lot of people talking about the overlap of nutrition for women's hormones and how much the two can be tied hand in hand. So I think it's really great to see more people talking about it and making the information more accessible. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's not exactly something that we even learn in school. So
definitely not.
It's why it feels so hidden to a lot of us, especially you're not hearing it from your doctor, that's for sure. And
Right.
sometimes we're not even hearing it from dietitians, because we just don't even learn that. We get we touched the main diseases that are most prevalent. Even though PCOS really is kind of one of those, but it's just not something we always learn about. So it's like, it's cool to get into our like deeper interests. Like you and I have gotten into hormone health and women's health and stuff like that. So it's fun.
Yes, definitely. So can you explain it then to people? Let's start with, what is PCOS?
So PCOS stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is kind of a weird name because not all people with PCOS actually have polycystic ovaries. It's just the name that it's been given, and I think there's some talk about changing that name, but it hasn't been done yet. It sounds very much like a reproductive problem, and it does have some reproductive like symptoms and repercussions, but it's actually an endocrine and metabolic condition, so a hormone problem. So yeah, that's kind of like what it is, but just kind of getting into like the diagnostic criteria a little bit too. The criteria for it is called the Rotterdam criteria, and you have to have met 2 out of 3 of the conditions. So the first one is cysts on the ovaries, which are actually like follicles with immature eggs. Number 2 is you have high androgen levels, like from a blood test, and androgens are hormones like testosterone. Or you have signs of high androgen, so symptoms like hirsutism, which is like extra hair in places that you don't want it. It could be hair loss on your head, and then something like cystic acne, like those are very common androgen related symptoms. And then the third condition is irregular periods or cycles, and or anovulation, which means like you're not ovulating or ovulating irregularly. So you have to have at least 2 out of 3 of those criteria to be diagnosed with PCOS. And it's not easy to be diagnosed with PCOS. Sometimes it takes years for people to be diagnosed because you kind of have to rule out other things as well. So sometimes it's not easy to actually figure out that you have it.
So can you explain then, for people who think that they might have PCOS or they're not certain, but they want to talk to their doctor about it? I feel like it's a really hard conversation to have, like medically, especially as a patient, because you don't want to sound like you think you know something or whatever. It's really intimidating, I feel like. So how would you recommend people bring that conversation up?
Yeah, well, I want to say first, like it can be intimidating, but doctors don't know everything either. They're knowledgeable on so much, but they're also very, very busy people and kind of overstretched. So I think there's no harm in asking and like advocating for yourself about the symptoms that you're experiencing and seeing if you need to look into it more or requesting to look into it more. It can only help you. So I would ask, like, I would say, hey, I'm having these symptoms. It sounds like a hormone problem to me. It might be PCOS. I'm not really sure. Can you help me? Can we look into this further? And just go at it from that angle. I think that would be the best way to approach it and try to get that diagnosis or rule out other issues that are going on.
Okay, as you may have noticed, I have changed some scenery here because the same problem that I was having when I was recording with her last time is happening again, which is very frustrating, but it's okay. We're going to get through this interview. And so we're going to continue on with the next question that I was trying to ask was, can you explain for people who think they might have PCOS and want to bring it up with their doctor, but they're not exactly sure what the signs and symptoms would specifically be? Like, how does PCOS manifest itself in someone's body? Because the diagnostic criteria isn't necessarily something that you can know personally. Like, you don't know if you have cysts necessarily and things like that.
Yeah, sure. So there's lots of signs and symptoms, and everyone's a little bit different. So you may not have some of the symptoms and other people may have those. That's why it's a little bit hard to get a diagnosis for PCOS, because for one, you may not know some of those signs and symptoms, and two, they could be signs or symptoms of other conditions or health issues as well. So there's a lot of overlap, which again is like why it's sometimes hard to get that diagnosis. And anyway, so some of the symptoms, it can range from irregular or absent periods to weight gain to having like facial hair or other body hair that you don't want to be there, fatigue, cravings, acne, hair loss, anxiety, depression, issues with like infertility or just like difficulty getting pregnant. There's others as well that kind of fall into the different underlying things that may be going on, but those are some of the main ones. So if you have any or all of those things, that would be like a good indicator to bring it up with your doctor and be like, hey, this is what's happening. Can we look into this further, dig deeper, get labs done, go through the diagnostic criteria and see if I have PCOS.
Okay, that's good. It's good to have kind of a concise list, especially from someone who's experienced it as well, because there's just so much information on the internet. Like if you were just to Google, like, what is PCOS or do I have PCOS or whatever, I feel like there's so many different details.
For sure.
So then the next step would be whether you've been diagnosed or you just think you might have PCOS, what would the nutrition information be for someone with PCOS? Like how do nutrition and PCOS go together?
Yeah, so with PCOS, there's a couple of things that are really driving the symptoms in the first place. So the two main ones are insulin resistance or high insulin levels and inflammation, chronic inflammation. So those two things are heavily influenced by nutrition. PCOS isn't caused by like eating too many carbs or by what you eat necessarily, but it can influence how those things are presented. And so that's kind of where PCOS and nutrition go hand in hand, is like we're looking at how can we improve blood sugar balance, insulin levels, insulin resistance, and inflammation through food.
Okay, that makes sense. So then what do you feel like are some of your biggest challenges when it comes to working with someone with PCOS and approaching their nutrition and how they're eating? What are some of those main challenges that you often hear from your clients?
Yeah, well, first of all, one of the biggest pieces of advice that people hear from their medical providers and in the online spaces as well is to lose weight. And when people hear that, they're like, okay, I need to go on a diet, I need to restrict. And so really one of the biggest challenges is that I find with my own clients and with others in the community too, are that they're trying to diet or restrict foods, especially carbs. And this usually leads to binge eating, disordered eating habits, and it really doesn't work long term and backfires. So instead, what the kind of approach that I take is like, okay, first we need to heal your relationship with food if that's a problem. And next, we need to approach nutrition through a nourishment lens instead of restriction. So that's like the top challenge, at least with the population that I work with, but that's what I specialize in is PCOS and specifically those who have a history of dieting or disordered eating. So again, yeah, dieting or restriction, especially trying to restrict carbs, that's one of the biggest challenges that I see. Another thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is they often experience really strong carb cravings, which is one of the symptoms. Like you feel like you could eat like a whole pan of brownies. That is one of the symptoms that's like notorious, I find, kind of across the board. Fatigue and weight gain and binge eating and high androgens all kind of fall within that too. And a lot of times this is due to high insulin levels or insulin resistance. So this becomes one of our other bigger challenges when we're talking about nutrition in PCOS. But in particular, strong carb cravings could also come from not eating enough or restricting carbs. So that kind of goes back into the first one that I said too, and how they're all kind of interconnected. But with the blood sugar balance and insulin levels, what we're really trying to do there first is approach it from a nourishment lens, because we know that dieting will backfire. So we're not going to do that. It's so easy to get into that mindset of like restriction when you know that something is going on that you really want to fix. And so you're like, oh, it must be my fault. It must be food's fault. And you just try to like take it out. But it doesn't quite work like that. So instead, we're going for more nourishment, how we can improve insulin sensitivity, and what foods that we can add in order to address that. So it could be things like making sure that you're getting adequate protein, eating regular meals throughout the day, especially breakfast, especially protein at breakfast, increasing fiber intake or adding omega-3s, movement regularly, or managing stress. Like all of those different things play a big role in improving insulin levels and insulin resistance, which in turn affects all of the symptoms that you're experiencing that fall within that. So, two major challenges going on there. Restriction and dieting, and then the blood sugar balance, insulin resistance, high insulin piece that really pushes a lot of the symptoms that people are experiencing.
So it sounds like you take a really good, like more of an intuitive eating approach to the situation, which is so good. Do you feel like a lot of people's problems then and their symptoms that they're experiencing with PCOS, do you find that they are typically related to kind of the cycle of sometimes PCOS can create weight gain and then they're on a poor eating habit cycle? Or is it more of the way PCOS affects your body that creates the bad eating patterns, but more negative like eating habits that you have to kind of
both
steer people away from? Both?
Yeah, both. Yeah, it's hard to decipher sometimes. People don't know that they're in that cycle. And so that's why I kind of take a twofold approach. We're going to do things that help the PCOS part of it, like nutrition and movement and stress and all of that stuff, to help with the actual physiology part of what's going on with your body with PCOS. And then there's this whole other piece of it around your mindset around food and your body and the intuitive eating aspect and the mental part of it too. So it's really both physical and mental, and you just have to do them together basically. And that's how I approach it with my clients and for myself and in my practice. Yeah, there's just no other way around it because it is both parts coming together and they do intermingle so much. But I do often see that so the higher, for example, like high insulin levels, insulin resistance lead to carb cravings, which maybe can lead to weight gain and like the high androgens and stuff like that. And then a lot of that's your outward appearance, right? So like, and your doctor's saying you need to lose weight, so you're trying to restrict. And it's just like this big cycle that keeps going on and on and on, that at some point you have to break through your relationship with food and also by addressing it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that is a big problem for a lot of women when it comes to their hormones, whether they have a diagnosed hormonal related or endocrine disease, is just that the cycle and the long-term dieting that is infiltrated into the mind from such a young age. I know it can happen obviously to all genders, but specifically for women in growing up and like what you see your parents or your mom modeling, and then how you feel about your body moving forward. And that malnourishment and lack of nutrients and lack of just foods that have a lot of nutrition and healthy fats and proteins and micronutrients from your vegetables and fruits and things like that. Just everything across the board is really plays into how your hormones develop. And then it can just really affect you long term, and it's such a bad cycle.
Yeah, terrible cycle. it's the worst, but like that's why we do the work that we do, because people first of all don't even know that that's happening, and and two, we need to kind of break that cycle and fight through it. But yeah, it is so prevalent, especially with this condition, with PCOS. And of course, like with almost everyone getting into that cycle, it seems, or that mindset, it's just hard. It's a hard thing to break.
Definitely. It's around us all the time.
Yes.
So I have heard, and I don't even know if this is true, so you can totally obviously correct me, but are there different types of PCOS? And because I know you said it's like a metabolic and a endocrine disorder. Are there different types of PCOS, and does it matter to know like what kind of PCOS you have? Or yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, so there is a lot of people out there saying that there are like 4 types of PCOS. I've never met anyone that falls within one criteria. So typically when they say there's like types of PCOS, they'll say like there's insulin resistance, inflammation, more adrenal, and then like post-pill, right? But these things can influence PCOS, but most people have a degree of all of them going on, or at least maybe not post-pill for everyone, but the insulin resistance, the inflammation, and the stress that contribute to it. And so I don't plug people in a category because it just doesn't make sense to do that. So technically there are not like 4 types of PCOS. It's just kind of one of those things that like you really hear a lot about. But I call them drivers. So insulin resistance is a driver, inflammation is a driver, stress is a driver, and you may or may not have all of those things, but most people that I work with have a degree of each of those.
Okay, that makes sense. And then one other question that just came to mind, and it's kind of maybe a big question. So what would your response be to people who feel like they have to be on hormonal birth control in order to manage their PCOS?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
You know what? It's tough because being on hormonal birth control, if you're experiencing severe symptoms, then hormonal birth control might give you relief from those symptoms like pretty quickly, right? And sometimes the symptoms may be so severe that it affects your quality of life. And so it's a personal choice whether you want to be on hormonal birth control or not. But what hormonal birth control does not do is fix the problem. It really covers it up in a sense. It's kind of a Band-Aid. So you don't want to be on hormonal birth control and then just be ignoring nutrition and lifestyle change and everything else, because hormonal birth control is not fixing anything, and there's so much more that you could do to just better support your body. The other thing to know about hormonal birth control too is that if or when you decide to come off of it, then those symptoms could come back. They could be worse. You could have sort of like a surge almost, and that could cause of hormones, and that could cause some issues too when your body's trying to like figure it out again. And it also depletes a lot of different nutrients as well. So you have to be sure that when you do come off of it, that you're really like supporting your body, supporting the system, is getting enough nutrients that you may be missing in order to have a better transition. And this is something I've worked on my clients with as well, is like getting off birth control and making that smoother transition as best as we can, because it does do more to you than you realize that it does. I definitely think that a lot of women are on hormonal birth control and may not need to be necessarily. It's like, oh, you have a women's issue, here's birth control. And so it's really kind of disappointing, because not to say that that's like a bad thing to take again, like especially if you're experiencing like severe symptoms, but what is difficult or disappointing is that you're not getting care in other ways, oftentimes at least, when there definitely could be other things there that you could be doing that could help your body and to support your body in PCOS.
Yeah. I think that's exactly the conversation I run into around endometriosis as well. As someone who has it, like a lot of times that's where people want to go. And it's the exact same conversation around with having such severe symptoms. If you're in a lot of pain, like how can I tell you not to do that? Because it's going to take it away. And I know how miserable it is to be in pain with endometriosis.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like you said, there's a whole other host of problems and ways to support your body. So that's interesting. Do you find that there's a way, have you navigated that with clients where they've stayed on birth control and you help them with their nutrition from that approach as well and improving their PCOS? Is that still possible?
Yeah, yes, it is possible, because there's a lot of different, there's a lot of different symptoms of PCOS, parts of PCOS, and it's really like a whole body thing. So birth control, for one, doesn't just like cover up all the symptoms. There can still be a lot going on too. So I have helped some of my clients. Most of them do decide to get off of birth control, or they're going through like fertility journey or something. And so like, that's not something that they're doing, but I have had quite a few that have been on hormonal birth control, and we have continued to still do some of the things that we would do with someone who is not on it. Because first of all, it's helpful to, if they do want to get off of it in the future, it's helpful to be prepared for that. And it's like, have your body prepared and to be doing some of those things that we know will be helpful when that time comes. But also, like you said, or like I said, there's other things going on as well, like other symptoms that may not be covered up by birth control. So we're working on reducing those things even when you are on it.
Okay, that makes sense. And so then also, like you said, from the fertility standpoint and with the menstrual cycle, and a lot of times I think with PCOS, people have very irregular menstrual cycles or they don't ovulate regularly. I think you said that was a diagnostic point. Yeah. What is that kind of what your big focus is on, like an end goal with your patients, like regulating the menstrual cycle, or is it mainly with insulin resistance and things, or I guess maybe just a combination of all of it?
Yeah, it's a combination of all of it. So I approach it from first, like we talked about, like, let's have a good relationship with food and your body. That's a big part of it. The next part of it is addressing the drivers of PCOS symptoms. So we're addressing the insulin resistance and the inflammation and the stress and like adrenal issues and anything else that kind of falls into those things or alongside of those things as well, because those are the things that drive the symptoms. And irregular periods and those hormonal imbalances that are happening that affect ovulation are symptoms of those things. So we're going at it from the bottom. I kind of think of it like we're starting there and then we're going up in that way for like addressing all of the symptoms kind of at the same time. So one of the goals, yes, is to have regular periods. That would be a progress marker for sure, to have regular ovulation and be able to confirm that as well. Sorry.
Okay, well that is all. That's good. It sounds like there's a lot of different facets to PCOS, and that's why it's really important to work with a professional who understands. I think it's great that you understand on a personal level as well as the professional level, because you just really feel for them and understand the experience.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to my clients in a lot of ways, even with like relationship with food stuff and like history of dieting or disordered eating and like lots of different aspects. So it is nice to be able to be like, yeah, I understand. Like I've been there too. I get what you're going through. And it just helps give me a little bit more of a drive to help them as well. So
for sure. So what would be your favorite piece of advice for people who have PCOS then and they're not sure where to begin?
Yeah. So this is kind of I knew this question was probably coming, and I I don't know, like a month ago or so, asked my previous clients, what's the best piece of advice that I gave you? Like, what really was the biggest game changer for you? And almost I was laughing when they were sending them back to me, because I was like, oh my gosh, okay, yeah, I'm doing the right thing. But it was almost everyone that said, the best piece of advice that you told me was to focus on what to add, not subtract. So focusing on nourishment over restriction did the best for them.
That's good. I like that a lot. It's very important. No matter what is going on in your life, always thinking about what to add in, especially with nutrition.
Yes.
There's always more we could be doing better. So I think then that will probably wrap up our interview today. If you want to share where people can find you or about your practice or things you have going on, feel free to go ahead and plug right now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again, like for having me too. It's been fun. I love chatting about this stuff. So
yeah.
You can find me on Instagram at pcos.dietitian.katie. I also have a website, KatieMassmanNutrition.com, where I have my blog and recipes and things like that, so you can check that out too. I offer one-on-one coaching and courses and hybrids of course and one-on-one too, so I have lots of different options covering things from insulin resistance to fertility to all of it together, more comprehensive in my longer term one-on-one programs as well. And all of that stuff is going on right now. So feel free to reach out to me on Instagram and say, hey, I need help, if that's something that you want and need. Yeah, I think that's it. So
okay, well, that sounds good.
awesome.
So thank you so much for coming on today. If the listeners have any questions, also, if they'd like to hear Katie come back again, I would love to have her as a guest. So give us any questions you had following up from this podcast episode, and all of the things that she just said, where you can find her and whatnot, I will put in the show notes so that you can just
Great.
click the link. It'll be very easy. And yeah, I think that's it. Thanks again for coming on. It was great to have you as a guest
Thanks
today.
for having me.
And of course, I hope that this has helped you guys to make better bites. Have a great week.